Hey guys, Dino at SpeedCircuit here, and today we're going to do an install video of our Firewall Heat Shield XXL. Let's go! So if you look over here, you see we have a stock Firewall Heat Shield on this 2008 Evo 10 GSR, and it's kind of tinny and flimsy. And more importantly, the main problem you're going to have with it is if you go to upgrade the turbo, it's not going to have the coverage that you need to effectively block all these wires and everything back here from being vulnerable to melting and catching on fire. So if you have a larger turbo or turbo and manifold setup or a large turbo kit, a lot of this space here is going to be consumed by it, and you won't even be able to run this Firewall Heat Shield at all. So your choices will either be an upgraded heat shield or none at all. And unfortunately, most upgraded heat shields won't fit a lot of the large turbo kits. You can see there's a lot of dead space back here from the factory that is unused, and our heat shield basically hugs the ceiling here and as far back as we could possibly go, within a 1/16 of an inch. Now, part of the reason it's important to have a nice Firewall Heat Shield solution is because there's a lot of wires back here, and there's a lot of risk for guys who track their cars for the wires melting and fires breaking out. I've seen it happen on guys with track cars and who race their cars, and that's the last thing you want for your precious Evo that you have years of time and money into. You don't want it to meet its demise just because you didn't want to install a heat shield on this thing. Now, if you're going to install a Firewall Heat Shield XXL on your large turbo kit car, it is strongly advised and generally required that you install the Firewall Heat Shield before you install the turbo kit. The reason being is that if you look at a lot of the larger turbo kits, there's no space to get anything in or out behind it. I mean, you have maybe a 1/4 inch in some cases or less, and there's no way to get a piece of metal in and out of that unless it's flexible. So you'd have to use some kind of cloth in that case. So you really want to do this beforehand, just to get out of the way, and then install the turbo kit afterwards. Otherwise, you may have to uninstall the turbo and or manifold to be able to, or at minimum the wastegates. It really depends on the kit to be able to fit everything in there. Now this is our third major revision of this Firewall Heat Shield. The original was just a Firewall Heat Shield. Then we needed to make a version that would accommodate dual external wastegates that full race kits had and such. So we had to make it bigger, and it became more expensive as well. So for a while we sold two different versions, the standard and the XL. And then turbo kits changed over time, and we had to eventually evolve the XL into an XXL that gave you even more space in different places for different wastegates. We made the XXL able to fit the wastegates of the current ETS turbo kit, and that's kind of a really large setup that, as far as I'm aware, we're the only heat shield on the market that will fit that setup. Now, your mileage may vary. Things are changing. There's a million kits on the market. Ours has a very high compatibility. In some cases, I'll point it out later, but if you look over here, our Firewall Heat Shield is going to extend all the way here to protect the ABS lines. It may require you to trim the bottom left corner here for certain downpipe setups, but that's not a big deal. It's not hard to do. But for most people, they're going to do the steps that we follow today, and they're just going to uninstall the old one and install the new one. It's pretty straightforward. If you're running a stock frame turbo, you could probably just do it on the car with the turbo already in there. So if you have something like this car, this has an upgraded Garrett turbo on it. I think it's a GTX 3576, yeah, the Gen 2. And you can see there's plenty of space behind it. The only times you're really going to be required to install the Firewall Heat Shield is before the turbo is going to be in situations where you're running a very large turbo kit that leaves basically no space back on the firewall. So the tools we're using today are going to be a flathead screwdriver, 10mm socket, if you could find it, 12mm socket. A wobble extension is optional. Swivel head ratchet is nice, as are the swivel head ratcheting wrenches, and you will need a vice grip or something similar. So first, we're going to have to uninstall these 3 10mm head bolts. The first one's going to be in the corner over here. The second one's here. I don't know if you can see that. And the third one is right here. And there it is, it's that easy. Feels like a soda can. So here's our solution, the Firewall Heat Shield XXL. Now you can see there's a lot of odd shapes and features in it. You can probably see Taj, our camera guy, in this thing.
Hello.
So it has a mirror finish, which is actually pretty nice because once it's installed, you could actually check around the turbo for any leaks or any issues. If you're working back there, normally you wouldn't be able to see, but it's actually really nice because you could work in the mirror now. And if you need to shave, Taj is waving himself, you could shave in this thing, it's great. But really, not only is it a functional piece, but it's also a nice showpiece. So if you're into car shows and stuff like that, and you want something blinging under your hood, this is great. This is stainless steel. It looks fantastic, and people always give compliments on this part. It's all TIG welded, and it looks really well. It's made in the USA. And it's got our SpeedCircuit logo laser etched up there. I don't know if the camera can catch it. It's easier to see this in person, but on camera it is very hard to capture this just because it's like taking a picture of mirrors. So anyway, we have a lot of nice design elements in this. For those who don't know, I'm obsessed with hexagons, which is why any cutaways are kind of hexagonal in shape, or partially at least. You can see this area up here. That is there for external wastegates for the full race kit, and just to have the maximum amount of space everywhere. We designed this heat shield to have the maximum amount of space that we could have up against the firewall itself. So any future turbo kits that come out, there shouldn't need to be any more modifications that we need to make to this thing in order to make it fit. One of the complex parts of this that we changed from the Firewall Heat Shield XL in coming up to the XXL is this extra pocket back here, because the ETS turbo kits have the wastegates, or at least one of the wastegates, sitting about right here, and just that extra little bit of space is required because your wastegate is going to be like 2 millimeters away from touching the shield. It's very tight, but it fits. If you also notice, we left this separated right here in case you have some kind of downpipe situation where you need to bend this out of the way a little bit, or, you know, trim it, as I mentioned before. You could trim it on the car if need be, and that's about it. So now we're going to get this thing installed, but first we have to do a few preliminary steps to make sure it's going to fit. So this next step only applies to 2008 models. See this black pipe right here? It's a drain pipe. You're gonna have to remove this, and there's a nut with, I believe, a 12mm head on the right side of it. You probably can't see it, but know it's there. If you don't have a 2008 model, you're not gonna have this pipe here, so you could skip this step. Okay, this car's a little rusty, so it's a 2008 that spent a lot of time outdoors. So rather than this nut breaking free, I'm just twisting the whole pipe. But it should just kind of crack free like a regular nut, but this is Evo problems. And there she is. You don't need that. The next thing you're going to do for all years is you're going to take a flathead screwdriver or some kind of pry tool, and you're going to come in here and pry this grommet off. The next step is we're going to have to remove the studs that are hanging off the ceiling like stalactites. We're going to have to put a vice grip on those and wiggle them back and forth until they break. There's another stud over here, same thing, take the plastic nut off and wiggle it around until it breaks free. So you're going to take your flathead screwdriver and you're going to insert it in this tab here, twist it, and pull it off. And once you get it off, you're going to have to do the same to another one up here. And then just push these guys out of the way. We need every bit of space we can get back there. So when you're putting it in, you're going to want to kind of hang it off that stud until you get your bolts ready. You're going to use the original bolts. I like to put this one in first. Just hand thread it. So we can do the lower left. Same locations as the original shield. Just hand threading them for the time being. And then finally the lower right. Okay, so the first thing I like to do is I like to center this stud in that hole and then just kind of hand tighten this. And then put a little bit of torque on it with our ratchet. Get it snug. Then move down to the bottom left. And then you're going to do the bottom right. Now go back and make sure your other two are tight. Don't kill them, they're just M6s. And that's a wrap. Now just look and admire your work here. It's a nice setup. There's a few smudge marks I have on it from installing it because I removed the protective film, but my advice would be to leave the protective film on there during installation and then peel it off at the very last step.